thank you very much for everyone for joining us here today for this conversation about standard essential patents. We have a robust conversation today. I know in the emails, a lot of you were hoping maybe we'd have a different conversation, but we're going to do the best that we can here to answer all of your questions. But the focus today is going to be on innovation, on standard essential patents, who's innovating, particularly with respect to standard essential patents, and who is actually leading the race, how and why. So we're going to talk about innovation. We're going to talk about patents. We're going to talk about patent families. And we have Dr. Tim Pullman to thank for the data that he's created for us here today. And looking forward to having this conversation with you. So looks like we've kind of plateaued for right now. I'm sure that more people will be joining us. But Renee, why don't we introduce the speakers?
Sounds good. So I'm going to start at the top. We have Dr. Tim Pullman. He is the CEO and founder of IPlytics. He earned his doctoral degree with the highest distinction from the Berlin Institute of Technology with a dissertation on patenting and coordination in standardization. He then went on to work as a postdoctoral researcher and consultant for the Law and Economics of Patent Group at Cerna Mines Paris Tech. In this work, Dr. Pullman was confronted with the challenge that standards databases have no real meaningful connection with the comprehensive global patent databases. So he founded IPlytics with the vision of creating the first solution on the market to bring together comprehensive, highly indexed technical standards information, global patents, declared SEPs, patent pool, and technical standards contribution data. Dr. Pullman has been actively involved in preparing empirical studies for the European Commission, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and the German federal government on declared patents, standards contributions, patent transfers, and patent pooling behavior. He is also an author of several peer-reviewed Economist journal articles, as well as some of the most read industry reports for IAM. Next, we have Meng Zhao. She holds a PhD in electrical and electronic engineering and worked on different cellular standards when she started her career at Motorola in 1994. In 2017, Meng took a position at ZTE to lead the Standards Essential Patents team focusing on 5G SEP development in the IP department. Because of her experience, Meng also started to support ZTE's licensing teams quickly after she joined, and since then, the beginning of 2022, took over the responsibility of ZTE's whole patent portfolio, including SEPs and non-SEPs, as the head of the patent asset management team. Meng Zhao has 15 years of experience in leading a team of technical patent professionals who are non-attorneys, has more than 8 years of experience in mobile research and development, and is a technical expert in wireless communications. Next, we have Tuomas Saukonen. How'd I do? He is the head of cellular standards patent portfolio at Nokia Technologies. He has extensive experience in licensing cellular standard essential patents and global litigation concerning patent essentiality and validity. Next, we have Robert Giles. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief IP Counsel at Qualcomm. Prior to joining Qualcomm in 2012, he was the IP litigation group at Morrison & Foerster, where he litigated IP disputes in the U.S. District Courts and International Trade Commission. Since joining Qualcomm, Bob has gained experience managing litigations in the U.S., China, and in Europe. He received his JD from George Washington University and his BSEE and BA from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And finally, we have our moderator, Gene Quinn. He's a patent attorney and a leading commenter on patent law and innovation policy. He founded IP Watchdog in 1999, and since he has twice been named one of the top 50 most influential people in IP. He is regarded as an expert on software patentability and US patent procedure, and has repeatedly been recognized as one of the top IP strategists in the world. So you are in fantastic hands with this panel. Take it away, Gene.
Great. Thanks a lot, Renee. And thank you all for being here, panelists. What I'd like to do is jump in and get your preliminary thoughts before we give the microphone over to Tim to go through the research that he has done. Bob, let's start with you. When and obviously Qualcomm is a leader in this space, but when you hear the question, who's leading 5G? 5G innovation, 5G standards, contributing to those, et cetera. What is it that first comes to mind that you want to share with the audience?
So, from my perspective, in order to make that determination, obviously it's a complicated question, and I know people have been trying to answer this question for a long time. It's kept Tim busy for quite a while as well. But one of the perspectives you have to look at is you need a little bit of background about what happens in the standards and how standards are developed and how the technology really evolves. And so at Qualcomm, we take a very systems level approach, which is trying to solve problems from beginning to end. It's a communication system, right? You can't just think about one aspect of it and expect it all to work. And so what we do as a research organization is actually work on the problems, kind of come up with the concepts initially, work on trying to potential solutions to the problems. We actually have some bake-offs between some of our engineering teams to see who can come up with the best solutions, and then actually prototyping that and kind of demonstrating that our solution actually is beneficial and is better than what's out there. And so this process of not only coming up with concepts, doing the R&D, coming up with the intellectual concepts, but then also kind of putting them into practice before we then bring them into the standards is something that I think is beneficial for everyone and demonstrates our leadership in the standards process. And so once we get them into this, or once we start to introduce technologies into the standards, we can build consensus, because we have data to show, we can show that our solutions are beneficial and things that should be adopted. So then you have to build consensus with other organizations in the standards process, and then those eventually hopefully get adopted into the standards, and you carry on from there. So it's a very complicated process to think about, and it's a complicated question to think about who's leading the 5G, whose technology is getting into the standards, things like that. But having that, some basic foundation with understanding how the standards process works, I think is very important to trying to answer that question.
Yeah, no doubt. We're going to come back to that throughout the panel, I suspect. Thanks, Bob. Mang, let's go to you next. What do you want to? What initial thoughts do you want to share with the audience?
When I look at actually I read Tim's reports many times, right? So there are numbers and everything, but who really leads the 5G? Actually, it's many companies are invested in the 5G as like the other companies, but ZTE is relatively a little bit later comer in the cellular world, but starting from 4G, and ZTE invested a lot in this domain. And also, as I said, think from technology point of view, the evolution of the different generation of the cellular is quite natural, because you're always looking into the improvements and a new system. So all the major cellular vendors are certainly leaders in this domain, because we are not only create standards, we also manufacture the equipment, make a system available so that people can utilize the infrastructure to develop the new applications and bring a lot of new applications to the world. As 5G, actually, it's not all the applications are in the market yet, but if you look at the prediction, like the 5G can bring a lot of benefit for not only the consumers and as well as the industry, as the improve the manufacturing efficiency and all kinds of things, or may have a smart manufacture facility, things like that. So as the previous gentleman said, it is a complicated question, but if you identify the leader, it's there, you can see them. So that's pretty much my answer. It's quite obvious who are the leaders.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Thanks, man. And Thomas, your initial thoughts as we begin the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Gene, and happy to be here. So I would like to echo what Bob also said. So for Nokia, it's also really important that when we are developing a standard, so we really start from the needs and the requirements of customers, enterprises, and industries to first look at what technology is needed in order to support all of these stakeholders. And then naturally that starts from the basic research. So from the long-term research, how we develop technologies to respond to those questions, building prototypes, bringing our solutions to 3GPP in this case, and then promoting our technologies, and of course working together with the entire 3GPP ecosystem to build such standards which are implementation friendly, and also that is really core also for Nokia, and also such that we really take care of the entire end-to-end functionality of 3GPP standard stack. So we cannot focus only one certain piece of that, but we need to look at it holistically, and obviously as a result of all of these huge investments, for example, that Nokia has put over the past 3 decades for 3GPP standards, and being one of the key contributors over this entire time. So definitely that results also in a large patent portfolio. But I still would like to challenge a bit that how we look at these numbers. Can we really justify, based on the numbers only that we see, that who is really leading the race, or who has contributed most? Because there are different angles that you need to take into account. So eventually, because first of all, not in all the inventions or patents that have been filed are equally valuable. So there are more fundamental patents to compare to each other. So I would still highlight that eventually, even though we look at these numbers, so still market is the best judge of the strength or quality or the size of the portfolio. So because they are really having the key interest on judging the value of the patent portfolio. So that's my key takeaways as of now.
Great. Thanks a lot. Tim, it's interesting. We have a conversation about who's leading, and the answer is not an easy one, as everybody's kind of put their finger on it. It's not as simple as just counting up the number of patents. It's not as simple as, there's a lot more to it.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more. I think we don't want to crown one winner. That's of course not the idea. It's a provoking question still that keeps people thinking about it. And I think also, as IPlytics is a data company, we would also not look at just one data source. Mm-hmm. We all, of course, try to look at different sources, different angles, and again, not crown just one winner. I think data also has to be always put in perspective. And I think what is interesting when looking at data, you can see trends, you can see, what are the top 10, and, even if you do or do not agree with the magnitude of their portfolios, I think the top 10 that we identify, many other experts would also identify through other data, through market data. So I think that is always good to have different data points to get a fuller picture, even if it's not the perfect picture. I think it's one way to look at things, to have one reference point out there. And I think it's also important to always discuss limitations of data. I think overselling it would be wrong. So I think, or I'm glad we have so many experts here today that we can discuss this further with what they see and what they see critical about it. And I think that's also something that we have always done at IPlytics. We've been looking at the market and at the experts, and how they think about data and what they see in it.
Yeah, it's there's a lot to it. For baseball fans, you might kind of think of this as there's a difference between the home run hitter and then the person who leads the league in batting average, and usually they're not the same person. but at the end of the day, often they have nearly the same number of RBIs, which is really what baseball is all about, to scoring runs, right? So let's dive into it, Tim, without any further ado, and see if we can start figuring out who is the home run king and who is the on-base percentage king and who has the best batting average.
Happy to. Yeah, I'm giving you some sneak peek here of some of the numbers that we create in our 5G report, which is not public yet. So this is really just a first sneak peek about it. I think to start with, I want to, again, say of course, when we look at, for example, patent declaration data, that data is self-declared and no other third entity basically checks essentiality. And there's a high share of patents that are not essential. I think there's other studies that have shown that not all of that, and people call it over-declaration. I don't like that term very much, but not all of that over-declaration is in bad faith. You have to think about that. Etsy, for example, asked the companies that participate in standards development of 5G to declare as early as possible. So they end up declaring patents that are yet pending for standards that are not final. So by design of that system, of course, we have a certain rate, if you want to call it that way, of over-declaration. But there's also some people call that flaws and inflation in the data. And I think in order to at least delete that inflation and flaws, I keep saying you cannot work with any raw data. So you have to match the numbers correctly. You have to clean this because there's a lot of false positive patents in the system where you end up with some chemistry patents, not because, it's wrongly matched, but the numbers, because there's so many patents in that database, have been wrongly put in. There's a lot of duplicate entries. Companies tend to declare each and every single patent within larger families to all different standards versions. You have to deduplicate a lot, but then even that, Etsy is not even complete. There are some counterparts, for example, of families that should be in the database that are not, as to even the Etsy family definition. And then you need to correctly classify what is really declared of 5G. We have some patents that are declared to a vague project named 5G, but then if you look at the TS, these are really 4G. And, you need to sort these out. And then you really, if you want to look at ownership, you have to enhance the data. You have to have the up-to-date ownership data, legal status data, if you can make any statements at all. So I just wanted to say that we do our best to work with what's publicly available with all the limitations, but at least get some of that out of there. And that you can do if you combine worldwide patent data, declaration data, and standards data that you have to bring together. First statistic is about the ownership. And if you look and consider all unique companies that have declared at least 2 granted and active patent families, either granted active in Europe or US, you see that the number of owners that we identify has been increasing between 215 and 220, even by factors 3x. And today we identify at least 131 unique owners that have declared 5G patents. We also, in the report, we look at the larger list, but here I give you the top 10. We, of course, also rank the companies. And again, we also put that in a report. You can see using different data sources, you come up with different ranks. And that's exactly also what we want to show. If you only look at patent families, unique patent families declared of 5G that are active and granted in at least Europe and US, we can also argue if we should involve here China and other jurisdictions, but we decided for EP and US PDO patents, then you come up with a certain ranking. We also have been weighting that ranking with certain indicators that correlate with value of patents, like forward citations and market size of these families. And the ranking changes a bit. Here, Qualcomm, for example, would be #1 in that second column ranking. And then finally, we also looked at the number of standards contributions. Here, we only consider technical contributions. So we kind of moved out and eliminated those non-technical contributions. But again, we know counting one contribution is not like counting one patent family. These are really apples and oranges. What I think is interesting, if you look at concentration, that those top companies that I just showed you are actually responsible for over 76% of all declared patents. So it's highly concentrated. Those top 10 companies own most of the patents declared. Interestingly is that this share has been changing over time, with a peak in 2019, 84%, but then declining ever since. So ownership in the past years has been a little bit defragmenting again. What is interesting, if you compare the level of contributions, that is pretty stable. So the top 10 contribution rate has been pretty stable compared to the patent declaration behavior. And then one slide that we just created because Avanci introduced their latest 5G program for the automotive market. We looked at the share of all Avanci members compared to the outsiders, and because Huawei joined, the member share and the share of declared patents and this is not only 5G, that is really across generations, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G together. We see that, again, depending on which data you use, you come up with shares between 80 and 85%, which is, quite a large share. I think all the companies and experts from companies here today are Avanci members. So I think that is something that the data at least shows an accomplishment that they have, gathered so many members. Final slides here, a little bit of the companies and where they come from. 5G is international, we know that. Companies come from different regions. Here we look at the headquarter region the company is coming from. And, weighting this by the share of patents they declared for 5G, you see that the Chinese share has been increasing over the past years. If you would only count the number of companies that have, and you used a little bit of a higher threshold, at least 10 EP or US granted patent families. And again, just counting the number of companies, not the patent portfolio, it is interesting that the higher shares are with US companies, European companies, and only then Chinese companies. So that is, again, a different trend and statistic if you count that. Yeah, more data and statistics will be in the report. If you want to sign up for getting a version sent to you, just send at info@iplytics.com and we will sign you up for getting that the minute it publishes. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. There's a lot there to digest. And how about I go in reverse order so Thomas doesn't wind up going last with his initial thoughts here on what Tim just. So Thomas, let me turn to you. Based on the slides Tim has just gone through, anything stand out? Anything you particularly would like to comment on?
Yeah, maybe the one of the key issue that I immediately noticed from this list of companies are that there are really well represented the companies who have been long in driving the 3GPP standards. So from the early days, so they are well dominated on this list. And that just shows that to me personally that the companies who really have the high incentive for building such standards which are let's say implementable and in a core of their devices that they are selling, so that is well represented. So really also the manufacturers of 3GPP based devices are they well represented. But maybe as a first comment from me.
Okay, great. Meng, your thoughts on what Tim has laid out for us.
Oh, so as the previous IPlytics report, it took all the data from all kind of regions in all the countries. So this one is more of the IP2 patents and count stuff. So it is from one angle to show, although EP and the US patents are really important. So this data showing up that will lead people to think about something. I'm not sure what in Tim's mind or the IPlytics suddenly changed their domain of the different angle to look at as he also mentioned, it's not like IP5 or IP3 or all these counts. So I trust the IPlytics data a lot because I use it a lot. It really can tell something. And also for this whole picture, I would like to say like ZTE's pattern are 5G patterns are generated very organic. It's or the ZTE's home generated. Its inventors are from ZTE, but there are some companies. The patterns are not really organically grown from the companies. So I'm just talking about the reality of the data. Although data can say something. So from the pattern data, you can tell a company how much research effort they put in and what is the results, and also matters of the patent management because this is all granted patents. So in order to improve the essentiality stuff, the granted patent may not issue so quickly in order to match the standards keep on going. So things like that. So what I try to say is data is a very good resource to tell a picture of who owns what. But if this data can be really used in licensing or something, and then it's all depends on how you negotiate with the other party.
Mhm. Okay, great.
Let me
Thanks.
stop here a little bit.
Yeah, no, we'll come back to these. So Bob, want to get your take on, you probably liked when Tim said that Qualcomm would be #1 on the patent asset index score. But any other thoughts jump to mind?
I always take any statistics with with a grain of caution though as well. And so one thing is the analysis that we would do is to determine whether or not a patent is actually valuable to the standard is actually kind of the core question that we're trying to answer. So then you actually have to look at the technology that's being contributed, how much it moves the needle or how much it pushes the standardized technology forward, then how strong the patents are that are backing those technologies that are covering those technologies. And so at a fundamental level, that's when I think of kind of the value of patented technology and things, that's kind of where I start from, which is, okay, can you demonstrate how this technology changed the standard landscape, changed the communications abilities, data throughput, things like that, latency as we've been discussing, as always gets folded into this conversation. So that's kind of the baseline approach that I would take. And then on the declaration data, I think Tim alluded to this, where so one of the things, and this goes back to what I was saying before about learning a little bit about the process that the engineers undertake in order to participate in the standard. And so you're making these disclosures, you're making contributions into the standard, and you also have your patents behind those. And so there's a timing issue of do I need to declare my patents super early, or can I wait until the standard gets formulated a little bit more? And there's been some back and forth on some timing discussions in the past, and some of the case law has kind of swung public opinion a little bit. But what happens is you end up declaring relatively early in the process, and at that point you have basically two moving pieces. One is the standard is still moving because it's not set yet, and also your patents, your patent claims aren't fixed yet because they haven't gone through the prosecution process. And so with that process, companies try to be as transparent as they can in disclosing what technologies they have filed patents on or have protected through patent rights. And but it's not a perfect system, and so so you get a little bit of there's just an inherent quote unquote over declaration issue because you're trying to be as transparent as possible, but yet some of those technologies don't make it into the standard, and some of them sometimes the standard swings and moves a different direction that you didn't anticipate as you were making the disclosures. But in good faith efforts, companies are trying to make those declarations as early as possible. Secondly, though, there are some, we've looked through some of the data, and it sounds like Tim is it has taken a look at some of this as well, which is, we're trying to figure, you can tell that some companies are gaming the system just a little bit, right? Declaring, what a lot of companies do is you only declare one patent in a particular family to the standard, and ETSI then, under the IPR policy, they consider everything else in that family disclosed. So you only have to disclose one, but everything else is considered disclosed, and so you can go back and figure out, if a family was disclosed. But some companies are, disclosing every single family member to make it look like they have way more patents, in the database than they actually do. And so there's ways that you can kind of manipulate some of them. Some companies are disclosing the same patent, but they want to portray themselves as having a broader coverage in the standard, and so they're disclosing that same patent to 5 or 6 different parts of the specification, parts of the standard specification, which anybody from a technical perspective that's looking at it realizes, hey, that can't possibly be the case. You can't, this patent can't relate to this, and this way over, on the other side. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 that it may apply to, because you get some lower layer technologies mixed with some upper layer technologies that actually work in the system together. But then there's others that are a little bit obvious. And so we have to be real cautious, kind of as we're looking at the raw data. And then on the contribution side of things, we have to be cautious as well. And I think people that are involved in this discussion are starting to learn a bit more about the contribution process, and the fact that some groups will mark contributions approved, some won't. Some they have different operating methodologies depending on what group you happen to be participating in at any given time. And so so the actual contribution side of things is also very, very tricky as well. And some contributions are it's kind of like technology contributions. Some of them are really fundamental to the standard, are really helping push the standard forward. Some of them, on the contribution side, you can actually go all the way up to just minor bug fixes and things like that could be considered a contribution that gets, or actually some typographical errors can be considered contributions, and they were being folded into this process at one point. So when you're looking at that data as well, you have to be really cautious. But just to go back to kind of where I started out with, really to understand the benefits of contributions that companies are making, you have to look at it from a technical perspective, and kind of understand what the technology is that's being contributed, and how it's moving the standard, how it benefits the standard, and how it benefits the technological advancement at the time.
So there's a lot that goes into this, and and we all are fully aware that, as Tim alluded to, is there is no such thing as an over declaration problem. That's the name that is given to a certain problem created by the fact that you have to, as Bob was explaining, disclose these things before the patents have even gone through examination in many cases. So you don't even know what their claims are going to be. And so there's no way to know for sure whether these are going to map on what ultimately gets adopted as the standard. So it is a bit of a chicken and an egg problem, and to call it over declaration is not fair, but that is what the industry seems to have settled on, calling that particular chicken and egg problem. But one thing, well, let me get Tim's thoughts before I go down that path, because Tim, what do you have to say? And we have a couple questions here in the box for you I can throw at you, and once I get your preliminary responses to the panelists.
Yeah, I think maybe to start with the ETSI database, I keep saying that is the best database on potentially essential patents in the world. It is much better to have an over-declared database than an under-declared, right? Think about IEEE's Wi-Fi, think about ITU-T's video codec. There you have really no clue at all. So I think I can only congratulate ETSI that, they have the rules they have. And even if it is limited, and even if we know there are limitations, it's the best database that you can look at, right? And it's therefore also the most accurate. I think, as also Bob said, and a colleague of Bob has written several really interesting blog posts about it for everyone to look up. There are limitations of the data, and if you look at statistics without knowing those limitations, it can be dangerous, right? You're overestimating and overinterpreting what's on there, and the slides I showed you, you should rather look at the report because we have, looked and discussed, the limitations of that. And I think that is very important. Any statistic you give and provide to really discuss it through. And data has limitations. If you think about contributions, we can identify which are technical, at least we can sort it out a bit. But again, if you look at approved and accepted, some working groups work with that, others don't, right? So for the report, we didn't use it because it was systematically not usable. Identifying something that is really 5G is also difficult, but not because not every contribution you can associate with the generation. So all we did is we looked at contributions from 2015 when 5G started, knowing that also some 3G, but especially also some 4G will be in there in the mix. So those things you have to just understand and consider when looking at data, right? You have to make decisions on how to work with data. And then from that decisions you make, you have to understand the results. There have been some questions about, handset and then network technology. And again, some patents are essential to a handset chip and others to a network, which is a different, it's also different, especially when you think about licensing. If you're, a vehicle manufacturer, you don't care about the infrastructure patents, right? There are ways to filter it out to a certain extent, at least if you look at the TS, there are some clear technical specifications that are for infrastructure and not for handsets and devices. But again, it's just, not perfect, because perfect would be if you claim charted everything, right? Which is probably, for getting the full picture, not economically feasible.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that goes into this. I keep saying that, but it's better to have some data than no data, because then we can talk about it, right? And one of the things that I personally think is probably to address what Bob was saying is, and what pretty much everybody understands is, if you know what's on the test, you could study for the test, right? And the way that this gets explained in reviews is if I know how my supervisor is going to review me and what the categories are, well, then I can do really well in the categories that matter the most, and I may not be the greatest employee in the world, right? I mean, so there is an ability to game any system, and you set the rules, and the rules are supposed to be fair and even and objective, and it's just the nature of things. There will be people who game things, but one of the things that caught my attention when you were going through it, Tim, is the slide that is the people on that list of having the strongest patents are the ones that you would expect. They're Qualcomm, they're Ericsson and Nokia. I think those were 1, 2, and 3, and then Huawei, which has number 1 overall on your list. I think they were 4th. So but these are all the major players. I think ZTE was 6. The major players that you see are at the top, pushing the top. And they're also on all these lists, as you pointed out. They're on the list of the most patents, maybe not, maybe as high as some others, because that's an easy one to game. But the quality, they're all there. And then they're also all there with respect to contributing. These people are contributing, they're innovating, and they're pushing forward, right? I mean, that's what your data primarily shows, right?
Right. I mean, and those are the ones who are leading, right? And it's, again, not that one single company. And that's why also today we showed the top 10. The top 10 is pushing, they own 76% of the declared patent families. And, depending, if you count contribution, it's almost exactly the same percentage. Even if you weighted by the patent asset index, also the top 10 own the very same percentage. So I keep saying, as to the rules of large numbers, you do see some truth in the data, right? Mm-hmm. Breaking it down to single patents, you will never have that. But the more you aggregate, the more truth you see. And I think, again, if there's no systematic bias, and I think at least eliminated most of those, I would say the data gives you some information to understand what's going on in the industry at large.
Yeah. Great. So we have some questions in the box, Tim, about the, the asset strength. Is it based on IPC classes? Why aren't you factoring in PCT application? I'd like you to think about those, and I'm going to come back to you for an answer on those questions. But one thing that popped into my mind when Bob was talking, and this maybe is just the patent attorney in me, and also knowing, now everybody's afraid of the recession that we're promised is just about here, but doesn't seem to ever really come and manifest itself. But budgets are always a concern, and budgets are a concern right now. And never heard it put quite the way you did, Bob, with, these things are just declared before the claims are really even examined for the first time, let alone a whole lot of them are even written. So it seems to me, and I like all three of the panelists to comment on this if you care to, in a way that is much more than I would have really thought until you said that. These patents are really about the disclosure. I mean, you have to have a thick, robust, meaningful disclosure that is growable to capture the innovation you really have, and then the standards that may ultimately be implemented based on your contributions, based on what it is you've actually invented. And I was just talking to somebody the other day. I won't name them. He's like, he said, I have clients now. He said, when I first started practice, he's about my age, so about 25, 30 years in. He said, when I first started practicing, we wouldn't have taken any case if it was under $5,000. And he said, now we have clients coming to us, 30 years later, wanting to pay less than $5,000. Those are not standards cases, right? I mean, you simply can't live in this world if that's your focus, right? I mean, is that fair to say, or am I missing something? Bob, you want to jump in, and then Mang and Tomas, if you have thoughts, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so I definitely echo that, and it also so it's even even more exaggerated, the quality of the specification, the patent specification, and the breadth and robustness of that patent specification when you're talking about technologies that aren't going to be adopted into the standard, or for 10 years, let's say 8 years out, right? If you're trying to foresee that far in the future, you really need to have a very robust patent specification, and so that's what we try to focus on, especially in the technologies that are way more forward-looking, right? We're right now doing R&D on 6G, right? But 6G is a little bit of a, it's not quite defined, and people have, some ideas of where it should go. And we're working on those technologies right now. And for those specifications, I tell my team that we need, and my outside counsel, that we need a big, robust specification, and make sure that we disclose all of the ideas that we have in the area. And that's part of the trade-off, right, with the patent system is you need to disclose everything, get it out there, so that others can build off it. And so we need to make sure that we're disclosing everything that we can in those specifications, because things will adapt and move. And I also want very high quality specifications drafted, because that's the foundation of the patents in the future. So.
Great. Tomas, I see you shaking your
Yeah,
head. I mean,
yeah. So definitely this is the case also at Nokia. So thinking about that when we are developing the technology, so we always need to take this long-term, mid-term, and short-term perspective into account. So how we are developing currently or finalizing the release 18 standard, or we are already looking into release 19. Or versus we are looking beyond to 60 standard. So of course, I would say that the key fundamentals of 6G are designed before the standardization starts. But at the same time, so when we are drafting your patent application and you are really putting a lot of effort to capture all the different details and different embodiments to protect your product idea that is coming from the research. So that is really the key of making the patent really a successful for this type of long-term research perspectives. But then we have also these different types of approaches. So we may have a mid or short-term perspective on our innovations and inventions that we bring to the standardization discussions, and that is also valuable. So we need to pay attention to different types of questions when we are dealing with the exact wording, even in terms of the patent specifications or drafting the claims, how our solution gets adopted to the standard, or how we can really ensure that our ideas are being well received and really showing the technical advancement compared to the other proposals made by other companies. So of course this is a moving target also, that you are developing the technology, you're promoting it to standardization, and then it gets adopted to the standard. So it's really the whole process, and it's really a quality of the process, how you are managing it, how you are drafting your applications, and also how you prosecute your patent applications so that it well captures the original idea of the invention. And maybe I just still want to kind of go back to the previous question also, that we have seen a lot of numbers across different companies, and I still would like to highlight that it's not just that we look at the numbers, but it's also about how the market has perceived
Right.
all of these statistics and numbers that can be drawn from the ETSI database, and you can do the math based on who is doing what. But it's extremely difficult to judge based on looking at these numbers, because there is no apples to apples comparison when you look at, for example, how the different companies are building their patent filing strategies, how broadly they are capturing into, and how they are breaking down the inventions into patents and so forth. So I think that the market is still the best judge on your strength and quality of your portfolio, and that is definitely visible also in the deals that we are making with the core companies.
Yeah, well, and not to go too far down the Avanci path, because that's a different conversation for a different day. But I think there's a reason why they have 80 to 85%. I mean, they bring so many technologies together, and it's sort of, using a baseball analogy, you could have Babe Ruth batting cleanup for you, but if there's nobody on base, even if he hits a home run every time up, that's only one run, and then somebody's got to be the pitcher to make sure the other team doesn't score more runs. So you need all of these things together. It's not like there's any. So when we say that there's a leader, okay, we could say, yeah, these are the leading companies, or maybe in this category, you look at this and the data suggests that they're leading here, but without everybody's contributions and everybody's technology, it just doesn't work. Which is one of the reasons why you look in the past, when some folks have tried to put together licensing marketplaces, it didn't go so far and so well, because there wasn't enough critical mass of all the technologies that were necessary in order for people to say, oh yeah, okay, if I take that license, then I've got 80%, 85% of what I need. That's where you start to get really some concrete intangible protection. But Mang, I think I know you're more of the business person here. And I want to get your take on the patent quality issue from, the business licensing perspective.
Yeah.
How important is that for you guys? What do you, how do you convince the management that this is something that, during times of economic turmoil around the world, we really can't cut here. We can't cut to lose quality.
Yeah. The patent licensing, certainly, even the litigation, when people are talking about the essentiality, or like we don't want to talk about EU rules, but still, if you want to have, people are talking about somebody having third party to judge the essentiality of stuff. But I always think if you are talking about high quality patents, whichever patent stand in the court and win and prove that the other party is really infringed, not only essential or not, whatever. So these are the high quality patents. So in order to achieve these high quality patents, I think in my interview with Tim, in his interview with me, I've already talked about how managing the patent place the life cycle management into the manager of the essential patents in order to improve the quality. There are a lot of elements in that process, and in order to not only improve the mapping of the standard essentiality, also will improve the validity, not lower invalidity risk in that process. So convince high management to, our high management is very supporting on investment in the SCP. Not only in the SCP, it's more of they are investing the development of the technology. As I made my interview, I've already talked about long-term, short-term, and mid-term kind of research. So they spend a lot of money in that. But as a patent management, the research will end up a patent anyway. So that's how they will invest a lot in the patent filing stuff. So for a patent management person, and I took responsibility to make the money be more efficient. What I mean is the budget I got, which is a big budget, and I use it to improve the quality of the patents. So that's what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answer your question, but no matter
no, that's fine. But if you say you have a big budget, I think you're going to get some emails from people here looking to pitch you work. Because and you're all laughing because in the industry, you guys are different. There's you guys, there's pharma, and maybe a couple sexy hot new things that people understand that patents are critical, and the rest of the industry is like, just give me any patent, give me the claim is a paragraph long, that's fine. If the claim is a page long, that doesn't really matter either, and it's like, well, that's not a way to go about protecting innovation that matters. So
right.
We don't have to go down that path anymore, but that's a topic that really does, interest me a lot. And I also think, I'll just quickly put my 2 cents in there. The companies that are doing the real innovation and really contributing and really, if your company wants to succeed, you need to be like them, which is, across the board, everybody says quality matters. In quality, the subtext of what we're talking about here today, counting patents is great in some ways, but if you don't have quality, it doesn't matter what you're counting. Quality, and the companies that succeed year in, year out, regardless of the industry, take that approach. Tim, I gave you some time to think about these questions here. There are people that are interested in the patent asset index a little bit. I mean, we could spend an entire hour just talking about that. But if you want to, in a nutshell, let folks know what that is a little bit.
Yes, happy to. So the patent asset index is an indicator that correlates with value of a patent portfolio. And again, it has also limitations, of course, but it has been proven, at least on a portfolio level, to give quite interesting results into that. It is based on the number of forward citations a patent family receives and the family size, where the family size is, again, weighted by the country size in terms of GDP. And I think the interesting part about it is it's really a dynamic indicator that you can look at, and also is dynamically changing as patent portfolios change and also become more increasingly shown to be more valuable than before. But again, that is also based on certain indicators that correlate with value, but that are, of course, not 100% determined that this is valuable or not. And it's not based on IPC classes. I know there was a question about it, but it has nothing to do. It's normalized by it, but it is not based on it.
Yeah,
but there's
and
an explanation out there for people to Google it. It's easy
I
to find.
think this is we did a whole hour on this at one point in time, and you know, these are metrics that are used to determine value and strength that are used by the European Commission when they're looking at antitrust issues. So it is open to the public to see. If you want to read all 200 pages of how they figure this out, it's wide open. And if but so it is some very important information, I think. And why aren't PCT applications considered in the strength assessment? I'm sure
They're not
that
granted. That's
well,
an easy
I'm
answer.
sure that they are in some respects, but they can't be, as you say, until they're ultimately granted, you know. And there is, and I know where that question is coming from. There's this perception that if you're going to file into PCT, those are a different level of seriousness because of the cost, and you're trying to get protection around the world. But you know, that again gets us to the chicken and the egg. You know, are you just filing PCT to, you know, to game the system, or do you have something that really deserves to be protected everywhere and needs to be protected everywhere? So that can mean something for sure, but there's many more questions that need to be asked there, I think. We're coming down to the wire already. This hour has gone by very quickly, but and what I'll tell the panelists, I'm going to get ready to ask you for your one thing that you want people to remember here in a minute. Tim, that we did have a couple questions on European companies and so forth. Is that when the study is released, are you going to rank companies based on geography, or what can you tell us about that?
No, it's just about where the region of the company, where they come from, and we show some statistics how that changed. Again, as to the limits of the data, but you know, 18% would be the percentage of European companies in the statistics. I think when the report comes out, every question that I see here in the chat is answered by the report, because we really take a deep dive into the data and explain the limitations, but also what it's based on and what it's not based on, and how we came up with the numbers, and then comparing a different angle to the same question and see how the results are different. So I think that's always what we have been doing in all the reports, and also in this one.
Yeah, no, and I'll just say, if you haven't taken a look at one of Tim's reports, and IPlytics, you know, Tim was the founder of IPlytics. So I call it Tim's report, but it's the, you know, it's Tim's got a big team, and it'll shine through when you read it. They're extremely detailed. They have an extremely well-researched, a lot of information. I would encourage all of you to try and, you know, get your hand, sign up to get this when it is released. Does a great job on that. Now, I guess it's time for us to pivot into the home stretch here. And what I would like to ask you all to do, if you can, what is, and hopefully there'll be more than one thing that everybody remembers from today, but if there's only one thing that people remember, what is it that you would like them to leave remembering? Mang, let's start with you.
What I want people to remember from this talk is there are a lot of reports in the world. The Tim's reports, the data is trustable, and but still, you know, it's from all different angles, and whatever the data is, whatever report is, like as a ZT, as a company, we will always do what our strategy will, you know, going forward is for standards essential pattern management.
Great, thank you, Meg. Tomas.
Okay, so what I would like to highlight from this report and generally when we look at the patent statistics is that, first of all, I would like to amplify that many of these big patent holders are also implementers. And also implementers with a long-standing, let's say, commitment and contribution to 3GPP technologies, and also that Nokia is continuing to invest into these 3GPP standards, because that's really that our company is depending on. I'm sure many people might want to draw some kind of conclusions out of these reports, like based on what is the value of the patent portfolio. But I still claim that the market is the best judge to judge the strength and quality of the patent portfolio. But definitely these numbers tell you something.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tomas. Bob, your final thought.
So I would kind of go back, and so in order to understand this area at all about 5G contributions and everything, I think it's very critical for people to have an understanding, and in order to analyze this area, have an understanding of how the entire process works from early stage kind of R&D efforts. There's things that happen very early on, even before they get adopted or even before they get presented into the standard, and understand that entire technical flow of how the technologies are developed and how they're introduced to the standard, and then also how the standards work. You're basically buying you have competing technologies, and you have it's essentially a meritocracy where the best technologies, the technologies that are going to move the standard forward and the technology area forward, are going to be adopted into the standards. And so just having an understanding of that entire kind of flow, and as we talked about before, contributions and how they actually take place, and patent declarations and how they take place, I think it's critically important for people to have an understanding of all of this process, when they're looking at the data, when they're understanding, when they're trying to make decisions. And then I'll echo what Tomas said, which is, the market, we have very sophisticated companies that are analyzing these issues, and very sophisticated companies that are involved on the licensing side. And the market, has put different valuations on different portfolios, and that kind of market outcome is something that is very natural in the dynamics here, and I think a good bellwether.
Yeah. And Tim, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I want to share this. Chuck in the chat said, and I think he was answering this question for himself and sharing it with others. How about you just say, over declaration is a feature, not a bug? And I think that's, it's a pithy, but that really is where some of the problems are, some of the concerns are: gaming the system, getting big numbers, declaring more than you should, but the whole system is set up to encourage you to declare not knowing whether it's going to be a standard.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it's for sure not a bug, and I like that. It's a feature, not a bug. I think it's also important, the Etsy database, that it has that feature. I think even if someone in Europe were to set up a new database, the Etsy database will be highly important, because we want to look at pending patents that may end up essential, and we want to see that early on. So I think that database has a high value also because of that. So I wouldn't say not. If I think about what I would summarize of this, I think if you think about numbers and the report, I think that the general trend shows we know who the top 10 companies are. These are the leader. These have been the leader in 4G, some even in 3G, and they're also the leaders in 5G. And I would expect to see some of them also in 6G, right? Yeah. So, and that's something that we can show. If you look at the leaders, we have leaders from China, US, Europe, but also Korea and Japan, highly international. The whole SEP game and licensing is international. We shouldn't forget that. If you look at the trends, it's more and more. If you count alone the numbers of declared for 5G, it's double the number to 2G, 3G, and 4G together. And for contributions, it's the same. So technology becomes more complex, and we see also increasing number of players. That doesn't mean we will have more companies that have large portfolios that they will license out, but it means we have companies that are implementing the standards, the technology, they're interested in it. They may also put some R&D in it. So I think we also see that. And I also couldn't agree more with all the other panelists. Looking at the numbers, you also have to think about other data or other market information to put it into perspective. Maybe I keep saying the market information isn't there as consistently available to make, put all the data together. But of course, seeing that companies are successfully licensing their portfolio in sometimes very challenging worldwide litigation, but sometimes also without litigation, even better, I think that is to be appreciated. And I think that is important. And then, things like pools setting up is another good reference point that the market is functioning and working, and that those leaders are able to commercialize and license their SEPs. So I think our report is one part and one puzzle piece in the big picture.
There's a lot of issues to talk about, but this is an important one. This is an important piece, because if you don't know what's going on fundamentally behind the curtain, because for so many people, this is the behind the curtain stuff, the innovation stuff, the figuring out what is in the standard. And if you don't understand that, then all the other issues, Fran, what is discrimination, what is reasonable, what is, all that sort of stuff doesn't make any sense at all. So I really appreciate this, Tim. Thank you for being here. Thank you, panelists, for joining us for a wonderful conversation. And you in the audience, thank you so much for spending a portion of your day here with us today. We look forward to hopefully seeing you all again in the future, but that's all we have for today. So bye for now. See you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.